for our next panel discussion, I would like to talk about our moderator. Our moderator will be Dr. Davis, Dr. Wayne Davis. He is a PhD in psychology. His focus, his study and research on the power of social and emotional learning in children. He's also previous chairperson of the African Scout Committee and the current Chief Commissioner of the Ethiopian Scouts. He's founded the Bright Future School in 1998 in Ethiopia, and also he is a consultant in the Center of Teachers Effectiveness, a global company based in the United States. We are delighted to invite Dr. Wayne Davis and his panel up on the stage.
Wow. The keynote speech was very powerful, and it really kind of kicked our panel into the point that education is an opportunity to change lives. And this is fantastic. And let's please put our hands together for our MCs that have been doing a great job today. Ladies and gentlemen, Scout brothers and sisters, I'm honored to have this wonderful discussion with our panelists. And let me introduce everybody. We have Miss Pia Mortensen, who's a member of our World Scout Committee. We have, no hands? We have Dr. Patrice Broder, who's a professor in the Institute of Religious Studies in University of Montreal, and also working with the KAICID.
That's right.
Thank you. We have Ms. Wan Jung Bion, who's Senior Project Officer in the section of Education for Sustainable Development in UNESCO. And we have Ms. Chitra Venkatesh, Head of Education, Community Partnerships, Schools, Youth, and Outreach with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF. So, based on everything we've been talking about today, from the morning speeches, our panel discussion, the keynote speech, everybody is aware of the Sustainable Development Goal and their importance to us, right? Yes? So this kicks our fun game, which is the Slido. We have two questions, but one is dependent on the first one. The second one is dependent on the first one. So can we have the first question, and please scan your QR codes and let us answer. Do we have it? Oh. Okay, until it comes up there on your screens. How strongly do you feel young people are working towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals as a result of non-formal education? That's the first question. Please hit your answer with how strongly you feel. Wow, we got a lot of 0%. Yeah, this definitely warrants the second question. Then if everybody feels like 44% of us feel at this moment very strongly, and almost 100% feels from moderate to strong, we all feel strongly that we are working towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Which goals do you think we are working towards achieving through this non-formal education? Which goals? That will be the second question that will pop right after that. This is really fun, isn't it?
Wow, climate action.
I think it will go on for a few minutes, so I'm going to cut it right there. But do you feel that there is a lot of agreement in how many of these SDGs we are meeting, we are working towards achieving? And there is that unified goal that we all want to get something done before it's too late. So do we all agree? It's really impressive. What do our panelists say about this?
I'm really excited to see climate action right on top. It was right there. So that really shows that we are really looking at the urgency of the situation, and we literally have less than 10 years to solve that issue. So it's really exciting to see climate action right on top, along with quality education, because they go hand in hand.
That is true. That's absolutely true. Yes, it is really impressive. And using this premise, as well as all the discussions that we have, I would like to ask all our panelists my first question. How does the non-formal education allow young people to better understand the Sustainable Development Goals? Pia, would you like to take first?
Sure. From a scouting perspective, well, I think that one of scouting's strengths is really to help young people be prepared for all sorts of challenges. We actually have this saying, prepared for life. And it's not something that just happens. It's actually because we work in a quite structured way. We have this method that we call the Scout method. It consists of 7 elements. And actually all 7 of these elements has a strong link directly to the SDGs, at least as I see it. But let me give an example. One of the 7 elements of the Scout method is the team system. So as Scouts, we always operate in patrols, so in these small teams. And within this team, quite fast as a Scout, you'll learn that within your team, you really have to build on each other's competencies, each other's strengths, knowledge, to solve quite complex tasks. And it's a bit the same with the SDGs. Like, I'm pretty sure we can all agree that nobody will be able to solve the 2030 agenda on its own. It's really something that, it's a team effort. So it's really something where we need to come together, need to put our thinking and our competencies together to work towards achieving the SDGs. So that's definitely one of the elements. I think another important aspect of the Scout method is the element of nature. And I think this is probably one of the elements where Scouting differentiates a bit from other youth organizations, because we really use nature as our playground, but also as our teaching field. And I think that gives a different kind of robustness and toughness in young people. I think there is a lot of Scout scarves here, and I'm sure you all faced yourself in a forest, pouring rain in the middle of the night, and you cannot really go inside, because it's not an option. You really have to face the elements being out there, and that kind of robustness, that kind of resilience is really one of the things that I think empowers young Scouts to be able to work towards the SDGs. So that kind of taking responsibility, feeling empowered is definitely one of the competencies and one of the things that we need to see from young people to work actively towards the Sustainable Development Goals.
Wow, yes. Dr. Patrice?
Yes. Well, first of all, I believe that as a teacher who straddles both the formal and the non-formal educational context, I recognize right off the bat the diversity of approaches, especially in the non-formal sector. I believe that many of our organizations here do represent that diversity, and it's really important that there be greater collaboration in order to empower more and more young people. And that's pretty obvious. One of the ways in which I see non-formal education is that it creates specific spaces that empowers young people, and that is often more important than the actual amount of information that you transmit to the student and that you try to measure through exams, which is often more at the heart of formal education. It has its place, but in complementarity to that, of course, non-formal education has a unique way, even more so today because of rapidly changing approaches and different influence of social media and different apps that we have in our lives. that make us want to do and learn and discover things in ways that are not necessarily top-down in terms of hierarchical dynamics. So non-formal education, for me, is really an important field to develop in complementarity, and it has already begun to seep into formal education and begun to transform it as well, including my university classes, by the way, thanks to the scouting movement that I've learned with. So thank you. As I think that very importantly, because we're in Brazil, we have to remember that this is the 50th anniversary of the publication of an incredible book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, that has transformed the world of education and pedagogy, because at the heart, he pushed the oppressed, those who are out, those 250 million today, he put them at the heart of the educational process and said, we need to start with their locations, what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what they're living on a daily basis. And it's from there that the educational process begins and becomes transformative, to use the word that repeatedly came up in Sarah's wonderful speech earlier. Education as transformation is key, starting from the self. I've seen it also earlier today in the UNFP presentation, whereby the new Step Up program of UNFP to empower young people starts with the self again. And that, I think, is really key in the non-formal education process. We can afford to do this, but not in an individualistic way, but in a collective way, as was mentioned earlier. And I'll stop here.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Patrick. Ms. Wang?
Yes. So I think everybody in this room would agree that sustainable development, in order to achieve it, requires a constant process of questioning and balancing between what you can choose here and what are other options available out there. And this balancing act requires you to critically think and review your options all along the way. And in order for you to do that, you have to be constantly aware of the processes of critical thinking and all of these competencies that are linked to sustainable development choices. But this morning, during one of the breakout sessions, when the moderator asked, what comes to your mind first when you think about the word SDGs? One of the participants actually shared, I'm sure she's here somewhere, that the first word that comes to her mind is disconnect. And I think many of you agree, and many of you will face daily, that when you try to deliver SDGs to the general public or to the audience, to the young people, you often feel that they find it very difficult to absorb and digest it in their own context. And in that point of view, I think non-formal education has a crucial role in not only delivering SDGs as a cognitive knowledge, but also promotes skills, values, and attitude, social-emotional learning, as well as behavioral learning dimensions of education to promote transformative action for sustainable future.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wong. Ms. Chitra.
So, let me see. I'm going to try and do an animal analogy because WWF. Okay. So I look at non-formal education similar to a school of fish, for example, right? We are very agile. We are able to change directions very quickly as compared to perhaps a large whale that's trying to change directions, right? We are very agile because we are able to do that. And this is our biggest, I think, unique selling point. And that's what we need to really leverage on. How can we make that agility our central focus, and how can we build on that? And SDGs offer that complementary opportunity where SDGs bring in that shared understanding of global issues. We're all trying to solve these global issues within our own little bubbles sometimes. And the SDGs help break us out of that mold and come to a common understanding of these. It has the potential to help us understand these issues using a common language. Whether we are doing it is something that we need to look into. The other thing that the SDGs bring is also the global citizenship values, because these values are constantly changing. They're in flux, and what was acceptable 10 years ago is no longer acceptable. What was acceptable 2 years ago is no longer acceptable because values are changing. People are standing up for different issues, different causes. So how can we ensure that these current values are part of the SDGs, part of non-formal education? That becomes a big, that's another complementary a complementary feature, I think, of bringing the non-formal education and SDGs together. So at the end of the day, most young people are looking for collaboration, they're looking for creativity, and above all, a meaningful way of engaging with an issue. So these are all possible if we use the SDGs. And how can we also bring in that collaboration across different organizations that are providing non-formal education? I think that's the question.
This is fantastic. With the same flow, how do you think young people here can be strong allies to the achievement, towards the work that we're doing to achieve these sustainable goals?
Yeah, so absolutely, well, they should be strong allies. I think we all agree to that, and that was also the point here. And I think we're facing the youngest youth generation ever of 1.8 billion, and absolutely. But I think it's not about making them allies. I think it's really about getting the young people in the front seat of the car, because we're facing this generation that will not accept to be in the back seat. We see that. We see huge masses of young people mobilizing themselves towards you can say the climate activism, and they will take a leadership for sure, but only if they get empowered to do so. There is a really good example from the Danish Youth Council who have actually added an 18th goal, because they think there is something missing here. So they added an 18th goal that is involve young people in achieving the goals. So they see it as an absolutely key to be able to work towards the 2030 agenda. And I think we really need to go from a point where we talk about young people as being allies for this, but we need to get into a place where we're not supporting them, it's them leading. I think that's the key here.
Thank you so much. Ms. Wan, let me ask a question, slightly different from what we just said now. But in terms of being outside the formal education premise, why does non-formal education fit the purpose of the SDGs? I mean, what would be the purpose of it in terms of getting us there?
I think non-formal, just building on my points earlier, I think non-formal education really has that specific and crucial role, for example, to provide these opportunities to expose people involved, especially young learners, to the realities. Sustainable development and sustainable development goals are all about the problems that we face today that will define our tomorrow. And in order to address them, you have to learn the realities. And through the non-formal education, young people can have this agile and as well as flexible opportunities to expose themselves to the realities in their own communities. Think about these questions that affect their own lives, and also perhaps create the linkage between their own individual futures with these issues. So creating that linkage would then hopefully translate into further discussions with their peers about how we can deal with these issues. And these kind of discussions may also lead to a transformative action, something that is out of our comfort zone, something that is disruptive, something that changes the status quo of today. And that, together with the opportunity to exchange views and experiences with other people around the world, as the Scouts are doing, will create this whole new generation of people who become the change makers for the future. And I'm very happy to share that only 2 weeks ago, UNESCO General Conference and its 193 member states have adopted this new global framework on education for sustainable development, which is called ESD for 2030, for the next 10 years. And one of the 5 priority action areas of this new framework is youth, and it specifically recognizes the importance of non-formal education. So I would like to, and I'm also a former Girl Scout myself, and I would like to invite everybody here to connect and reinforce our work on this non-formal education's contribution to the SDGs. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. So, Dr. Patrice, based on what our two panelists said here, and what you yourself mentioned earlier about non-formal education modeling transformation being used for a better education as a tool, do you think non-formal education, through these actions that we have spoken about, could be a model for SDGs achievement? And if so, how?
It's not, could it be, but it must be. It must become that. I think that non-formal education is the perfect way of addressing these issues precisely because it's a global approach to understanding our situation on Earth today. It's very inclusive of the complexity of the problems. We all know that there's interconnectedness between any one of those 17 SDGs, or 18 if we want to add. In a conversation just at the founding headquarters of the Scouts just a few days ago, I had a conversation, and we also added an 18th one, which had to do with dialogue and the importance of developing the skills of dialogue, because that's the means through which we then address the conflicts that are often at the heart of any one of those 17 SDGs. So that was one sort of example. But I really strongly believe that it's the non-formal sector that has the flexibility I was mentioning before to address those issues in a quick and responsive way. One small little example is that as we do training of trainers, I have to slow down, thank you. I'm happy I saw you. Thank you, translators, by the way. Bravo for the translators. So one of the what came out of one of the trainings with the Scouts on Dialogue for Peace program that we have developed, the Scouts and the CAICID International Dialogue Center, is the notion that we do training of trainers to have the trickle-down effect so that the badge of dialogue can actually reach out eventually to the 15 million plus Scouts throughout the world. And by the way, we have worked with other youth organizations as well, and we want to strengthen that too. But one thing which came up by one person who said, why should we have the adults do the training of trainings? Why can't we actually empower adolescents in their own framework, in their own formal or non-formal context, become their own training of trainers? And so thank you very much for responding. And so that would be another way of concretely responding, empowering young people to take more lead in creating that need.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ms. Chitra.
Sure.
And when I just came back to you. So, in light of what has been said, and it really warms my heart to hear what we're discussing here. But coming to reality, what do you think are the major barriers that we have in achieving the SDGs through, be it non-formal or formal, but especially through non-formal education and working together or working through young people towards that? What are the major barriers, and how can we overcome these barriers?
So I think when it comes to barriers, we've kind of touched on it in our different comments. So the SDGs have the potential to create that common language, but are we actually doing that at the ground level? Are we co-creating the meaning of each of these SDGs in a way that's relevant to the different communities? That's one of the biggest issues that we need to address. Because, for example, let me take my own organization, WWF. Many years ago, like when the SDGs were first, like we played a role behind the scenes in how it was created, and our own organizational goals were aligned to the SDGs. But over a period of time, let's say, for example, our conservation scientists don't necessarily look at the SDGs as the language, right, that you want to communicate in. But perhaps our youth workers or the people who are working with communities, schools, are more familiar with these SDG languages. So how can we mainstream this conversation, this language that we have, and make it more relevant to the communities? Because if it's not meaningful, it's not going to be used. That language is going to become obsolete. So there is not going to be any achievement. So I think one of the biggest barriers is how do we make sure it's mainstream? Because people like you and me, we are working in this space. So you talk SDG, I know what you're talking about. But does everybody else outside there understand what's an SDG? Whether there are 17 of them, do they even understand that they're all interconnected? That's the biggest challenge, I think. And number two would be, again, something we've touched on, innovation, for example. Right? There's a lot of innovation. Young people have fantastic ideas, new ways of looking at something, new ways of solving a problem. But we also have people who are so stuck in doing things a certain way that there is no pathway to bringing that innovation to the top. So how can we ensure that we are building that pathway to bring that innovation to where it's really needed and as quickly as possible? Because even if you look at, for example, the future of work, you're talking about, empowering young people for a changing tomorrow. What's that tomorrow going to look like? You're looking at work that is traditionally done by a white-collared worker somewhere, getting broken up into smaller pieces. You're pretty much applying Henry Ford's automobile, that process into a work that was traditionally done by one person. It's broken up and it's done by people from across different parts of the world. So that's the future of work. So when we are talking about SDGs, are we looking at all of these issues that young people have to face in the real world? Are we making it relevant? Are we providing opportunities for innovation? Because if you're not going to move the needle for everybody, you're not going to achieve the SDGs. So it's how do we move the needle for everyone and not just some people?
Yes, mainstreaming it and getting all of us together. I think a good example would be, as they say, what unites us is greater than what separates us. And 70 organizations got together to make this a reality, isn't it?
And if I may add one more point before I forget. So I think the third point I wanted to say was, let's not reinvent the wheel, because a lot of us are really good at doing what we are good at. Let's not try to reinvent the wheel when someone's doing a fantastic job. Let's find a way to use, is it Goal 17 partnerships? Yeah. So let's really look at how we can work together and solve these problems together. That's what we've done. Like with WWF, we didn't want to go and create a new youth movement. We just partnered with the Scouts. And we said, hey, we'll bring in our expertise, and we will let you be the experts on engaging the youth. Because that way we are both meeting our individual objectives, but we are also addressing a big global issue. So we need more of these collaborations, partnerships, so that we are working together. It creates that bigger momentum and a bigger impact.
Let me take this question to Pierre. Based on what we're talking about now, how and why are our organizations here so narrowly linked when it comes to the achievement of the SDGs or the SDGs in general? And how can we advocate together in unison without reinventing the wheel, without going, the hard labor? How can we work together and be credible at doing so?
Yeah. So maybe now, being a bit bold, I would say this is where Chicho made the right choice and came to Scouting, I think, because in all fairness, Scouting has worked for the SDGs for the last 100 years, even before the SDGs. Mm-hmm. So in our aspirations to create a better world, I would say that we have 100 years of experience working towards the SDGs. And I'm slowing down as well. Thank you, Paul. And we do that because it's so much in the DNA, and I think that's the same thing for a lot of other organizations working with non-formal education. It's so much in our DNA to be these active citizens, to take a responsibility in the society and essentially in what's around us. So when we're talking about advocacy here, a lot of the organizations here are not necessarily advocacy organizations, it's learning organizations. And especially what you would see from a Scouting context is that we would never make a campaign about planting trees. what we would do is we would go plant the trees because there is a need. And then maybe that action would turn into a campaign because somebody sees some potential in this. So I think what we are really good at and why it's so credible coming from our side is because we never do it for the sake of advocacy. We do it because we truly believe that this is the right thing to do, and then we share the story afterwards. And I really promise all of you that even though we talk about the 2030 agenda here, Scouts aspire to create a better world even beyond 2030. So that's a promise.
Yeah, that really is powerful. That is wonderful. Unfortunately, as all good things must come to an end, we'll have to wrap up. But before we wrap up, I think we have enough time to take a few questions from the audience. So we go back into our technology again to the Slido, and please shoot your questions up, and we'll take very few, maybe 2 or 3 questions. Our panelists will address those, and we'll wrap up after that. So let's go ahead, scan, and send our questions. Everyone but the Secretary General. No, I'm just playing. You asked? Oh, you'll have to ask a question if you have a question. If that doesn't come up live, I think we'll go the traditional way maybe for a couple of people. That'd be good. Okay. Yes. Oh, the mic, yeah. Oh, we have the questions up there. Yeah, I think go ahead, and then we'll have the other 2 up there.
Perhaps.
Let's see.
Oops.
Yes, here we go. Troels?
Thank you. I'm Troels, I'm from Denmark. The UNESCO described competencies for sustainable development as combining knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values in action. In that, where do you see non-formal education as being best positioned to contribute?
Okay, Ms. Wan.
Well, thank you for that question. And I would have to say that in all, absolutely in all, but especially building skills, values, and action. Because in complementary relationship between the formal and non-formal education, we feel that formal education has certain standings that would support especially this knowledge deliverance of factual knowledge. But in fact, when we deal with building skills, attitudes, and values, and transforming that into transformative action for change, that really is where non-formal education has to step in. So I completely think that it is all through, in all steps, but especially towards the parts on action.
Thank you so much. Here we have a question that's very popular. It said, as said before, we won't be able to achieve all the SDGs until 2030. How should we prioritize our actions and efforts? Ms. Chitra. Yes, Ms. Chitra. Go ahead.
So, they are all interconnected. You should actually attend my session that I'm doing tomorrow to get the full answer. Because there are certain things that form the foundation, especially given that climate action was one of the first things that came up. So there are certain SDGs that form the foundation. At least that's what WWF believes, or people with certain organizations believe. So how do we make sure that the foundational SDGs are really achieved? Because on top of them come the other layers of the goals. So if your base is not strong enough, you can try and achieve something on top, but it's not going to have a very good foundation to stay on. So again, attend the session tomorrow.
Yes.
Can I make a comment on that as well?
Yes.
Because I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Tritya, but I think this is also where our goal number 17 can play a role again. Because we said that we are 68 organizations together here at the forum, and we all have different competencies, different specialities, and different areas of expertise. So I think the more we manage to bring these expertises together and use that knowledge, like the scouting patrol, in a good way, I think we are able to solve much more complex issues than we would be able to do on our own. So I think being even better at working together and figuring out how together we can solve these complex problems, I think that would be another key to...
Yes. It's applying 21st century skills, basically, every day, and taking it one step at a time until you're done with it. So you're not going to solve these problems in one day. There is no silver bullet, unfortunately. You just have to do it one knot at a time, and you will get there if you're all aligned and we're all working towards the same goal.
Yes. Dr. Patrick,
I might bring a slightly different approach here, because I would not prioritize any one of them collectively in a general way. I would ask the individual persons or organizations to say, well, what's the priority within your context, especially locally, and work from there, rather than thinking that somehow, some are more important than others, and so on and so forth in general.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Which is also the time to the last question.
The next question we have is, do we risk forgetting about the responsibility of governments when talking about young people's roles as drivers towards the achievement of the SDGs? Ms. Wan, you want to take it?
Yes. Well, I think it is very important. Now we are in the recent months and in the past couple of years, we have seen how young people are coming out to the streets and calling for responsible action on the parts of the government and the institutions. So when we talk about young people's role as drivers of the achievements of the SDGs, they are indeed driving our discussions at the moment. But nevertheless, there are processes in which we try to connect these actions by the young people, as well as putting the responsibility on the shoulders of the government. And for example, this new global framework that I mentioned earlier, that would kick off next year in June in a UNESCO World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development in Berlin. This new framework asks and places much more emphasis on the member states' leadership on SDGs and how they interact with them. One of the 5 priority action areas should be youth. So this connection, and we will be, as part of the monitoring of Target 4.7 of the SDGs, UNESCO will continue to monitor the progress on these aspects to keep the government accountable for the actions that they take towards transformation for the successful achievement of the SDGs. So there are frameworks in place that connect youth activities with the responsibilities of the government.
Thank you so much. Let me hit the third question, and that will be the last question we have. We all agree about the power of the SDGs, but how do we deal with the fact that this will cost money and big change in lifestyles? I mean, I think that's the biggest hiccup we have on our everyday lives. So who would like to take that? Yes.
I'll take it. So I think the previous question we spoke about governments. So any problem or any issue that we are working on always has 3 components, I would like to say. The community, the government, but let's not forget the businesses. Okay, so the businesses are the ones that are moving the economy, and how do we get them into the dialogue? Because let's look at, I've heard somewhere that in the last, since we were founded until now, WWF has probably invested about $10 billion in conservation work, this is probably the advertising budget for one of the big companies for 1 year, advertising only. So that's the kind of imbalance we have economically when it comes to addressing these issues. So what do we do then? We bring the people into the dialogue. We get the businesses involved, make sure that they see that sustainability or achieving these goals are also very, very important for them to continue into the future as well. And that could be one way of ensuring that there is that equity, that there is a change in the economic models eventually as we move forward.
Yes. I think translating education into action is all about what we do with it, because knowledge alone is not enough. Knowledge requires action for it to be really meaningful. And what we do as youth organizations, as educational movements, is very powerful only and only if we add action to it. Before we close this session, I would like to ask each of you if you have a parting word to our audience and to each other. Okay, let me start with you.
Yeah, I think we can all agree, also based on this panel, that non-formal education is really key in terms of ensuring that we get young people equipped to take that responsibility and that future, to be able to translate essentially SDGs into and education into action. And I think, me personally, I think I'm an example of that, being exposed to non-formal education. I come from a workers' class family in Denmark, lowest education level, and I'm absolutely sure that it's due to my role in scouting and that I was exposed to non-formal education that I had the courage to pursue further education to high school, to university. And I think that self-awareness, that courage to fail, but learn from your failures, rise again, being able to have that self-confidence to take responsibility for your own future, I think that's something we owe to any young person, and that's something that everybody in this room can actually help. So I think every young person deserves a right to meet a community, to meet friendships that empowers them to be able to take that responsibility on.
Thank you so much. Dr. Patrice.
There are two things I would say. First is that we have a responsibility being here and having the luxury to spend the time to be able to be here. The responsibility to empower each other individually and organizationally to strengthen what actions are going to come out of this particular event. Second, I believe that as we want and seek to streamline SDGs in our respective work and our circles of influences, how do we not forget the oppressed, those that are, because streamlining to me implies that you go streamline in existing structures. Yes. But then what about those who are left out, the 250 million, let's say, right? And so how do we do both at the same time is key. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Juan?
I must say, this is only the afternoon of the first day, but I'm super inspired by everybody and the energy in this room. I've never been to a conference in a plenary where there's so much energy and excitement. And I've had the opportunity to interact with some of you over the course of the morning today, and I know that I'm in the presence of a group of doers. So with you, I would like to invite you to take the leadership in your own countries, in your own regions, about this ESD for 2030 framework, to work with your governments, to work with your stakeholders to make a difference in the next 10 years. So let's work together.
Thank you so much.
So for me, I think the only thing we can be certain of is that things are going to change and that they are going to be very uncertain in the future. So the only way we can get past that is if we keep an open mind. Like someone mentioned this morning, the whole the future is all about not just learning, but unlearning a lot of things and relearning a lot of things. So that means you're constantly changing your perspective, and you're constantly learning new ways of doing something that you thought you knew how to do. So I think as long as we keep an open mind and we are open to collaboration, there is, I think we're all in agreement that non-formal education is going to address a lot of the gaps that we are facing right now. So there's no question in that. But along with that, it's keeping an open mind, being more open to new ways of doing things, being open to stepping out of your comfort zone, and taking a step into that dark unknown, I think is what's really important, and we can do it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I really thank my panelists for their insightful words and wonderful interventions. I thank you for being great audience, and I also thank all the people that have been following us through live stream. Thank you so much for your support, for your interest, and let us all remember we are part of the same movement. When it comes to creating a better world, it is not just a Scout thing, it is not just a one person or one group of people or one demographic thing, it is all of us. And we owe it to our children, to our families, to our friends, and to everybody that we interact with. Thank you so much. With this, I would like to yield the floor to Felipe and Ing. Thank you so much.